All right, guys, today we've got Nick Frangione. Nick, how'd I do?
Good. That's good.
Yeah,
That's
all
very
right,
good. Yeah, very
cool.
Italian.
All right, thank you, man. Writer, director. We're going to be talking about a short film that you made. You've been making features lately, and maybe we'll talk about that another time. But this short film is, um, it's heavy, it's deep, it's realistic, and it's a very smart, really well-directed film. I like a lot of the clues that you've kind of left behind about the characters without really, making it too obvious. The theme is fathers and sons. It's called Hand Me Down,
Right.
which is, really a hint at the legacy of abuse and violence that often goes on in families. Um, Thanks for being on the show, man.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. This is great.
The first question is really, what was the kernel, the seed, that initial spark that the story was built around on?
Yeah, I think it was my own frustration with myself as an artist because I was a 20-something-year-old struggling artist and I was very angry about that. I was very angry about I felt like I felt like I had talent, but I didn't know how to express it. I obviously wanted to work in film. I also wanted to be an actor at the time. Um, I was thinking about trying to be a musician, but I was not very good at it. So I would play these little shows here and there. I was living in San Francisco at the time, so I'd play these little shows, and it just really wasn't. I wasn't connecting whatever talent was inside of me with skill. It just wasn't linking. So, um, and I also had a lot. I did have a lot of unresolved tension with my father, and I think the first, kernel of it was a frustration with myself as an artist and not being able to have those two things meet. I think, at one point the father says to the son, like, what are you trying to be? You're just an imitation. Um, and that's how I felt. I felt like in my frustration, I was trying to imitate other people, other artists that I saw rather than be myself. I just didn't know how to link the two,
Mm. You know,
myself to the art.
it's really interesting how that concept, because that concept, that struggle, um, to find your unique or your personal or your kind of authentic means
Yeah.
of artistic expression. How is it that that can take a lifetime and very long for a
Right.
lot of artists, certainly. And it's interesting how that kind of, let's just, I don't know, for lack of a better word, that kind of a breakthrough or coming out, you framed in the context of your story with another layer of a son needing to break through the shadow of his father.
Yes.
And so you've got those kind of, an artist breaking through the constraints of finding their voice, and
Right.
then the son breaking through the constraints of also finding his voice with the
With his
father.
dad around. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's, definitely, I think all of us can relate, having that inability to feel at home in our skin and in our bodies with those
Right.
conflicting things, and having it layered up,
Right.
can get really intense as, the violence breaks out in the movie.
Right. Yeah. I
Um,
never thought of it that way, but it is kind of violent. Looking back on it, it turns into violence. The anger manifests as violence. That's true.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. I
I think I
mean,
was so angry at the time it didn't even occur to me that it's violent. It just occurred to me as like, yeah, he's
yeah,
angry.
that's normal,
That's
right?
normal. Yeah.
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 Um, you know, the father and the son share the immaturity of having their focus be on their unmet needs.
Right. That's true.
And I think, that ultimately is part of the reason they can't find that common ground to communicate.
Right. Right.
Um, so that was my observation in the movie. And I think that is so realistic. I think it's so just, you know, ingrained, and that is definitely how this legacy of dysfunction gets passed,
Right.
from one generation to the next. And definitely resonated with me as far as a strong message of the film. You making the movie, I think it's two different things for filmmakers. The one thing about making the movie and the message that you're either trying to communicate, or the message that you're the story that you're following kind of as a detective. And then there's reflecting on it as a filmmaker, or as just a viewer, really. And what does the story communicate to you now? So
Right.
whichever is more inspiring to you, can you talk a bit more about the message of the film, either as you see it as a viewer or as a creator?
I think as a viewer, it's really interesting to hear what you're saying as a viewer. Hadn't thought about it that way. As a creator, I mean, even as I'm talking about it now, there's like a selfishness to that, to and it doesn't help you unlock your creative voice to be looking inward. And that's exactly what I was doing. Like I was looking at myself, um, even through that other character's looking, just me looking at myself the whole time. So you do have these two very selfish people, and it's great for tension. I mean, I think that that's a good thing to do, when you're trying to create tension, and a film is a lot to do with tension, right? But yeah, as a creator, it was a lot of pointing back at myself rather than looking outward. But I'm glad that as a viewer, that could resonate with somebody and maybe go, maybe I'm looking at me rather than looking outward. And his, I remember his girlfriend at the time in the film is looking at both of them and really trying to see, like, you could just be more open minded about this. He's your father. You could be more open minded about what you're doing creatively and be proud of yourself. But he's just incapable of doing that. So she kind of represented that voice. She kind of is the viewer, I suppose, in the whole film. She's the viewer of this dysfunction
Right,
that's
right.
not working itself out, and unfortunately trying to do her own part in working it out and not succeeding.
And what I think I hear you saying as is that when you made it, you made it at a time in your life where you were young, and
Yes.
you really used the film in a way to reflect back on yourself. And did it help?
Yes,
Yeah.
it did. It helped a lot. I mean, it took the first draft of that script was so terrible. It took me about a year to write it. Um, so it was a lot of, I mean, even as I'm talking about it now, I think there's a lot of self-judgment about the whole thing. And I think that the only way out of self-judgment was to put so much self-judgment on myself through the process of the film that I was able to transform something, and at least at the end of it feel like I had made something that was per my voice. Like I looked back on that. I ended up making a feature in between the one I just made and Hand Me Down. I made this other feature that I don't regret it, but I had a lot of issues with it. Um, and I remember when I made this last one, I looked back to Hand Me Down as the first time I really expressed myself in any honest way.
Mm,
So the film became the thing that I was trying to do, which
mhm.
was express myself honestly and
Yeah.
as me. Yeah. It was
And
not easy, but it happened.
I think that that's what you hit on the
Yeah.
head, and I think that's the real, it because when we were talking earlier, for me to say, oh, finding your own voice, it just felt so cliche, but I didn't really have a better sense of it. And I think what that
Yeah.
really means is expressing yourself honestly,
Right.
and being able to do that, and taking off the walls, the filters, and having the self-reflection and the maturity to be able to do that. How do you
Yeah.
think you got to that honesty?
I think it was through a lot of judging myself. I think it was through a lot of, but I also think that the father character and his girlfriend in the film became another way of looking back and having to direct them and having to see where they're coming from about it. Because otherwise, I was just, we're so insular, we're just looking at ourselves and the way we feel about a situation. But what's great about directing is that if you don't want if you want characters that have dimension, you have to be able to put yourself in their shoes, in the antagonist's shoes. And so I guess I had to do that, especially in editing. I think editing's a really great space to do that too, because you can't just focus on. I couldn't just focus on myself in the cut. I had to focus on the other characters, and so it was a lot of reflecting back. It just forced me to reflect on myself. I was literally watching myself. Man, I had to play a song and hear the song in the
Right.
movie.
Right.
And I was
Yeah.
like, oh, this is a bad song. It's true.
Right.
This is a bad song. And
Yeah.
I thought, no, this is a good song. And then I'm actually looking at it going, no, that's not. It's not.
Mhm. That's
Uh,
great, man. That's great. So I think one of the things I heard you say is make your antagonist sympathetic as well to make
right.
them multi-dimensional. And so
Right.
it forces you to put yourself in their shoes,
Right.
which is, coming out of your own selfish insular.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now as a viewer looking back on that film, what do you think the message of it is?
I suppose that's a really good question. I don't know. I guess it's to, yeah, maybe to be honest, but also to forgive. I mean, he's got his father who's just feeble. I mean, he can barely walk, and he's just being cruel to him. He's being cruel to his dad. Um, but it's also, the dad's also being not quite nice to him. People are going to be imperfect. Your parents are going to be imperfect. They're people. They're just people. Um, and I don't know what other choice you have other than to forgive them and try to look through their lens as much as possible. Maybe we make our parents out to be these people who are supposed to be perfect when they're not. And we live with the pain of that. Like, why live with the pain for the majority of your life with the fact that your parent was an imperfect person? And also, if your parent is imperfect and you're focusing on that, then you're also being imperfect yourself.
Right.
Because you're not able to find forgiveness, and you're not able to open yourself up. And he's just so tense. I think that there's just that,
Yeah.
being able to release that tension. That character, the lead characters that I played, was just so tense. So hopefully there's a release. I would like that. It would be nice if the viewer has some sort of release, but maybe also experiences some sort of regret at taking out their anger on their parent.
Yeah.
And maybe they can look from that and say, okay, maybe I shouldn't do that to my father or my mother. Maybe I should try to be more peaceful in the way I engage with them.
Nick, as now, having 14 years,
Yeah.
and we've touched upon it a little bit, but how do you think that making that film has changed you in the course of your life?
Oh, I don't think I would have been able to make my last feature without it, because that was opening the door to dealing with the fact that my father and I weren't speaking, because it took years. I mean, when my mother passed away when I was a teenager, and my father and I didn't speak after that. It didn't have a relationship until I was almost 30 years old. So I think it opened the door to having a relationship with my dad, because I started to see something in a different light, but not entirely. And it also allowed me to start making features, because people got to see that I was capable of making a film, period. And that's kind of the catch-22 of filmmaking, is like, you need somebody to believe in you, but they're like, what, give me something to believe in. It's getting so much easier now with technology, but that made it possible for me to make features, that film.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Nick Frangione, writer director, thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you. This was lovely.
Awesome. Thank you, man. The film is Hand Me Down. You were nominated by Molly Ratterman, and look forward to talking to you again and sharing your work.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. All the best. Take care, man. Bye-bye.
Bye.